Good morning. Now I would like to open the first breakout session, TEPCO and the Future of Energy Policy. My name is Tadahiro Wakasugi, and I'll be the MC for the sessions held in this room. Just for your information, the hashtag for the Twitter is G1 Summit, G1 Summit. Let me introduce the panelists for this session. Mr. Kojiro Fujii, attorney at law in New York and Japan, Nishimura and Asahi. Lady Barbara Judge, Deputy Chair of TEPCO Nuclear Reform Monitoring Committee. This session is moderated by Professor Tatsuo Masuda, visiting professor at Nagoya University of Commerce and Business Graduate School. Professor Masuda, please.
Good morning, and great audience and lovely panelists. Tatsuo Masuda, I'm honored to moderate the session. We like to have a lot of interactions, so I'd like to make our discussion very concise and leave plenty of time for interactions. Before going to, let me introduce two panelists, not on things already said here, but not reported. Lady Barbara Judge is my longtime friend, and we've been working together in a very interesting group, a Windsor Energy Group, which holds annual meeting within the Windsor Castle every March for 3 days. And we also, she's from law background, I'm a historian, but we both engaged with a group of people called the International Federation of Scientists. Mostly they are nuclear physicists, but occasionally, interestingly, we are invited to join. That's why energy issue is so diversified. They need the assistance from lawyer and historian. And what is not written here is she married to a famous man who founded the Judge Business School in Cambridge, law judge. And what is secret here is she has a risk of being invited from Hollywood. We like to block it because we lose important panelists on energy issues. And as for Fujii-san, Hori-san recommended him. He told me he is obviously clearly the leaders of the next generation for this country and globally. And he has been exposed to international community for so many years, and he knows how power games may work, and he knows how to win. I'm very much interested in knowing him, what he'll be saying to us. Myself, I'm a historian by background, but historian cannot make money at all. So I pretend to be energy policy practitioner and energy and climate geopoliticians. Let me start saying one or two words about what is Japanese energy policy, how it is made. I just go through last short 70 years in 2 minutes. As you know, Japan was heavily dependent on coal right after the war. Nearly 50% of total energy supply was coal, domestic coal. Then Japan enjoyed swimming in cheap and abundant oil before it was hit by oil shocks of the 1970s. The shock was really fatal, but Japan managed to overcome those challenges, making it a new energy model for the world called Japanese energy model, based on the efficiency and sense of scarcity and humbleness about natural resources. Another fatal blow came after Fukushima, but we interpret this is an opportunity for Japan to bring forth a new energy architecture no country ever achieved. Japan should go beyond just ensuring secure and sustainable energy supply for its own. Japan should put itself on a global context, getting out of insular mindset, and set a role model for the rest of the world, how to fight against climate change, because it is a planetary emergency. With this, we are very much honored and happy to be able to hear from Lady Barbara Judge, because she is very unique. She is a woman, a most beautiful woman I know, and elegant, but backed with intellectual power and power of communication. And she's uniquely sit in the middle of the reform of TEPCO, the largest privately held utility power company in the world. And most importantly, she's leading its initiative to set up a new culture of safety. Barbara, floor is yours.
Hear me? I'm going to forget the microphone, if that's okay.
Please, can you use this for the...
Oh, sorry. Oh, okay.
And there is also
No, I'll put it here.
okay.
The problem for me is that I talk with my hands, and I'm always smashing the microphone back and forth. Then when I get it on the tape, it goes smash, smash, smash. So, as Satso said, and nobody ever introduced me as nicely as my friend Satso was doing. So you can see he's a historian, but he's also a flatterer, and he's also charming and handsome, and it's a real honor to be here and sit on the panel with somebody who's as intelligent and charming and well-read and renowned around the world to talk about Japan's energy policy. So I'm really thrilled to be here, and thank you for such a nice introduction. As you heard, I'm a lawyer, and I do words, not numbers. But lawyers learn fast, as you can see, because we've got another lawyer on this panel. So I thought these are the only numbers that I'm going to give you in this whole speech, but I think it's interesting, these numbers. What I thought I would do is talk about the statistics on nuclear before the Fukushima accident and after the Fukushima accident, because they're quite interesting. Before Fukushima, these are reactors operating in the world. Before Fukushima, there were 443 reactors operating in the world. After Fukushima, as of today, there are 435 reactors operating in the world, which means we're down 8. Okay. Reactors under construction in the world. Before Fukushima, under construction, there were 62 reactors in the world, and today there are 72 reactors in construction in the world. So that means we're up 10. With respect to reactors that are planned and are likely to be built, there were, before Fukushima, 156 reactors in the world, and today there are 174, which means we are plus 18. And reactors that are proposed, which means they may or may not be constructed, before being talked about is what really it means. There were 322 reactors, and today there are 299, which means we're down 13. Now, actually, if you look at those numbers, what you really get out of it is that nothing much has changed. Basically, the number of reactors being built, operated, and planned in the world is about the same. So what's changed? What's actually changed is that the nuclear ship is floating, is going straight above. It's not sinking, but it's actually moving eastward from where I sit. Now, it's westward. Well, it depends whether I sit in America or Britain. As you can hear from my accent, I have both passports. I'm American, but I have a British passport, and eastward or westward is depending whether I'm pretending I'm American or British for the day. But it's towards Asia, in actual fact. Asia is where things are happening in the nuclear industry, and that's because Asia needs them. In Europe, things are less happening, and that's because the Europeans, in a lot of cases, have taken the opportunity of Fukushima. The countries that didn't really like nuclear before used Fukushima as a reason to retreat from nuclear, whereas the countries that really wanted nuclear really kind of learned the lessons and went on. So let me think about energy for a minute. What are the three most important questions that anybody needs to think about when they talk about energy, any country, not just Japan, the United States, Britain? Okay, the three questions are energy security. Do we have, as a country, enough energy? Energy independence. Where does that energy come from? And climate change. Do we want to wreck our atmosphere and climate for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren? And actually, if you think about that, the only kind of energy that really answers all those three questions is nuclear. Energy security, do we have enough energy? As of today, this is maybe different in the future, but as of today, do we have enough energy? Well, there probably is enough energy in the world. There probably is enough oil and gas, but actually it's in kind of odd places. It's in Russia, it's in the Middle East, it's in places that are not necessarily our best friends or a stable situation if you look at the Middle East, or even think about what's happening in Russia. Okay, energy independence. Do we have that energy in our own country? Because remember, if you want to get that energy from Russia or from the Middle East, it has to cross a lot of national boundaries. And in today's very turbulent world, national boundaries may be a problem. And climate change. Well, we all know that nuclear doesn't emit carbon. So if you look at energy security, do you have enough energy? Well, if you build a nuclear power plant, you can build it as big or as many as you need in your country. Energy independence, if you build it in your own country, it doesn't have to cross all those national boundaries. And we all know, as I just said, that nuclear doesn't emit carbon. So if it were all that easy, why isn't everybody building nuclear power plants all the time? Well, historically, as you may remember, in the 50s, people started to build nuclear power. Indeed, Eisenhower said we were going to have energy that was too cheap to meter. And there was, in fact, a great rush in the United States and in England and in various countries around the world to build nuclear power plants. What happened is the nuclear power plants were built. They provided a source of base load generation. One of the things that's very important when you think about energy is that you need energy to run all the time. You don't really want it just to be top-up energy. I mean, somebody might say to me, energy security, energy independence, climate change, you could look at renewables for that, and it would be in your country. It's true, sun and wind are very, very fashionable nowadays, and in fact very important in the future. But at the moment, they're just top-up energy, so that solar works when the sun shines, wind works when the wind blows, and frankly, some night you're going to come home, and if you only rely on solar and wind, and it's a dark, still, cold night, and you turn on the light switch, your solar and wind energy is not going to be there, and you're going to be in the dark. So we need base load generation that goes 24 hours a day. And as I was saying, nuclear provides base load generation without emissions. Okay, so what happened in the 70s was that people were, 50s, 60s, people were building nuclear power plants, 70s and 80s. There were two big nuclear accidents. One was Chernobyl. What happened in Chernobyl, as everybody knows, is that people were playing around with the reactor. The reactor had a flawed design. When there was a problem in the reactor, the people who were running it just turned off the keys and drove home, and the Russians didn't tell anybody. They didn't do anything, and there was a problem. In 3 Mile Island, it wasn't a failure, it was a success. When the reactor fell over, there was a problem inside. itself turned off, so nobody was hurt at all. Fukushima, everybody knows quite a lot about Fukushima in this room, and there's been a lot that's happened and been said about Fukushima. But what really happened with energy and why people stopped building nuclear power plants was that right after those accidents in the 70s and 80s, first of all, oil got cheap. The price of oil went down, and so people didn't need to build so many power plants as they did before. For a long time, oil was cheap. And when the nuclear renaissance started is when oil was expensive. Oil started to get expensive. People started to worry about peak oil. People like us in the UK realized that we couldn't rely on the North Sea for gas. We were importing gas rather than exporting it. And so we had to start to build nuclear power plants again, and that's what we were doing. Now I have 15 minutes. I didn't notice when I started. So I'm going to go quickly over the issues. I have 7 minutes left. Okay, let me just tell you that the issues that every country needs to deal with when they build nuclear power plants, most of them begin with P. Most of them are about where you put the power plant, what the price is. Quite expensive to build a nuclear power plant, but once you build it, the energy price is quite reasonable and it's stable. It doesn't gyrate like oil and gas. People, in many countries, there's a skill shortage. There aren't enough engineers. But in Japan, actually, because you've been running nuclear power for all these years, you have a lot of engineers. Engineering is a very important part of the Japanese education, and you're very lucky because you have a good resource of people. The other P is permissions. Well, we do know that regulation before the Fukushima accident, the regulators were really quite close to the operators, and after the Fukushima accident in Japan, you've created the NRA, which is a new, very tough regulator, very independent regulator, and so the regulatory issue, which is always around, is being addressed in Japan, which is important. The other two issues are press and public relations. How many people are press in this room? Anybody? Well, I know Nick. One more, okay. What newspaper are you from? Japan Times, okay. I'm about to say, but don't get cross at me, that part of the problem for nuclear is that saying good things about nuclear doesn't sell newspapers. So often, no, but not the Japan Times, I'm a big fan of Japan Times. Often there are newspapers that print things that aren't so good about nuclear, and public relations. This is a very interesting issue about nuclear. 2 years ago, I was speaking in Japan before I started to deal with TEPCO, and I gave a speech that said, it is known fact that in society, the people that are most against nuclear, are women. Women, and particularly better educated women. And in France, America, Germany, Japan, it turns out it's all the same. So I gave that speech. I said what I thought the Japanese should do as a country was to have an overarching advisory board for nuclear, for the whole nuclear project, and they should put more than 50% of the people on that overarching advisory board should be women. Not just nuclear women, but teachers and mothers and doctors, and they should try to educate the women about the benefits of nuclear because, as I said, in most countries, the women are the ones that are against it. Well, nothing happened in the government to my speech. It was widely reported, but nothing happened. However, a couple months later, after that speech, I got a call from TEPCO. And the call from TEPCO said that TEPCO was going to set up something called the Nuclear Monitoring Reform Committee. And that, they never mentioned my speech, but they wanted me to be deputy chairman. And frankly, as I said to somebody, as I listened to this man saying to me, we want a foreign woman to be deputy chairman, I was amazed. I was totally amazed because I had heard that in the old METI, they had heard my speech and they said, yeah, we heard Lady Judge's speech about all those women, but this is Japan. We'd never have a foreigner, and we'd certainly never have a woman telling us what to do. So here was TEPCO, obviously having listened to my speech. And what did they do? I went to this meeting, and they had another foreigner being the chairman, Dale Klein, and they had a couple of people who were, at least if they weren't anti-nuclear, they were certainly anti-TEPCO. So good for TEPCO. They were putting on this panel a very independent group of people to try to help TEPCO itself reform itself, be reborn. And you could see that there was a commitment within the new management in TEPCO, because the people who were at the top of TEPCO, by the time I got there about 2 years ago, were all new people at the top from before the accident. And what they said to me, everybody had their own job on this panel. The chairman had the job of decommissioning, and my job was self-regulation and culture change. My job was to help TEPCO truly reform itself. And they said, you can hire whoever you want, Lady Judge, you can take as much time as you want, you can do whatever you think, but provide us with an idea of how to reform our culture. And I went home, and over the Christmas holidays, I studied what America did, what Britain did, and what France did in terms of self-regulation and in terms of safety culture. And I wrote a very long report. It was actually too long. I had to condense it into about 12 pages because nobody was going to read my 50-page report. I knew that. I wasn't sure they'd read my 12-page report, but they did translate it into Japanese, so I think people did actually read it. But what I said in my report was what you should do is set up an in-house self-regulatory organization so that you, this organization, will be advising the board and will go around the power plants and check to make sure that the new safety culture that we were going to put in was actually happening. So that before the regulators got there, there'd be in-house regulators. It would be 2 sets of regulations to make sure that the new safety culture was actually happening. And they said, they liked the idea. And then they said, you, as I said downstairs, okay, you help us find someone to run it. Because I said you need a foreigner, with respect, that you need somebody from outside who's independent to run this, because you need a new safety culture. You need to bring best practice from abroad, from operating power plants all around the world into TEPCO to talk about safety culture. Because before, what I saw was that TEPCO had a culture of efficiency, not a culture of safety. Their efficiency and operation, the plants were running, they were doing a good job of keeping the energy rolling, but safety wasn't the first priority. So they gave me full rein to set up this nuclear safety oversight office. And then I said, what we need is independent experts. We put the Japanese people in the safety office, but we need independent experts to advise us on what is best practice. It can't just be me and this one other man, Dr. Cross. So we set up a task force on nuclear safety, and we invited people from the best operating power plants around the world to come to TEPCO on a periodic basis and to advise us on what is best practice. How are we decommissioning at Sellafield? I know very well because I come from England. What's happening in GDF Suez, which run very good power plants in Brussels and France? What's happening in Sweden? What's happening in America? We looked at who the best operators were, and we got their heads of safety to come to TEPCO and to advise us on our task force. And I'm the chairman. Now tell me how many Japanese companies would allow a foreign woman to tell them what to do, to actually say, this is best practice, this is what we should do, and you have to come up to the mark if we're going to be the best in the business. Because my opinion is that we should be ultimately the safest nuclear operator, not just in Japan, but in the world. And I think this because, listen, I remember years ago, someone much smarter than I was said to me, the safest time to ride on an airplane is the day after the accident. And that's true. The people that have the accident learn the lessons. The lessons are right there to be learned. Other people don't often learn them as well as the very person that has the accident. And that is absolutely true. My theory is TEPCO is dedicated to reforming itself. It's got all these people who are coming to give them advice in a very un-Japanese way. And that's because they want to be the best, and they want to do it as fast as they can. And they're pouring efforts into having education classes, starting from the top of the company, starting from the president. All the executives all the way down are taking classes and learning about safety culture. The new chairman of TEPCO comes from a safety critical industry. Mr. Sudo comes from the steel business. They know a lot about safety culture in the steel business. There's a huge emphasis. It's safety first. And to me, that is the most important thing about what's happening at TEPCO, that this is a renewal of the company, reform, rebirth, but the safety culture is new. What it is an effort to be the best. And the Japanese can be the best because look what you did to the world. You had the best cars, you had the best media equipment, you had, I mean, I remember Walkman. I was so excited when somebody had Walkman, you know, and Sony. You guys have the best engineers in the world, and you're dedicated to doing things perfectly, properly. Engineering, manufacturing, the Japanese are the best.
Barbara, this is great, but could you keep the best parts
Okay,
for the second half? Okay.
What I'm not so
Thank
good
you.
at is stopping. So I will basically say that it's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to be asked by TEPCO to be part of the reform movement. I'm delighted to be at this summit. I hadn't ever been here before. The school is beautiful and wonderful, and I see the chairman is here, so I bow to him and to his very excellent conference and wonderful business school. As you heard, I like business schools. So thank you very much. And I would really like to say that there's a tremendous effort going on to make Japan the safest place to operate nuclear power plants in the world.
Thank you, Barbara. This is great.
One more thing, please. It's very important for those people who are here, particularly the journalists. I am not saying that nuclear is the answer. I must say this. I never say it's the answer. I say it's part of the answer. Any country needs a bouquet of energy sources. They need oil, they need gas, they need renewables, they even need coal, but they also need nuclear. And that no country that has ambitions to be an important country economically in the world today, particularly one like Japan with what's going back to its grandeur, can possibly afford to throw any source of energy off the table. The most important thing is a bouquet of energy sources, so that I need to leave you with that impression because that's my total belief about energy policy. Thank you again.
What a wonderful bouquet of energy. That's great. And now you see she has a big risk of being kidnapped by Hollywood. With this power of communication and beauty, who can resist? And I think one of the impressions I got from what Barbara said is probably her efforts in TEPCO and TEPCO's efforts following her advice. TEPCO could be a role model for the other utility companies in Japan and the rest of the world in terms of new culture of nuclear safety. All the best for this. I'd like to move on to Mr. Fujii, the youngster, and he'll be talking about international cooperation, including LNG issues. Fujii-san, please yours.
First, I would like to thank the coordinator of this G1 conference, especially Mr. Hori, Advisory Board, and the G1 Secretariat for their hard work to coordinate the session. And I have the honor to be with Barbara Judge, who is a prominent lawyer, and the community of NYU School of Law, where I also study law, and Professor Masuda, who is a distinguished figure in the energy sector, and a former official of Ministry of Economy and Trade and Industry, where I also worked until recent 2 years. In such sense, two speakers, my Dai Senpai, and today, my very short speech to add another topic into this session, which is the flip side of the coin of the nuclear energy in Japan, and this relates to LNG. With the suspension of nuclear plants in Japan, LNG became the primary power source of Japan, and TEPCO became one of the largest purchasers all over the world about LNG. Let's begin with this slide. The soaring fuel cost impacted national finance, and we see the sharp decrease in our trade balance by 18 trillion yen after the great earthquake, and the current account of 2013 was the lowest ever since 1985. And here you see the increasing LNG procurement cost. It doubled in 3 years from 3.5 trillion yen in 2010 to 7.1 trillion yen in 2013. And this shows that LNG became the primary power source, replacing nuclear energy after the suspension of nuclear plants in Japan, and now it's occupied more than 40%. And here, accordingly, electricity charge for household increased by approximately 30% after the great earthquake. Here you see there's a huge price difference between the regions for LNG and natural gas. Japan is purchasing LNG much higher in US and EU. And even within East Asia, Japan tends to pay more compared with purchases in Taiwan, Korea, and China. Against this background, Japanese government and some LNG purchasers examine what is called destination clauses in LNG purchase agreement. Destination clauses essentially prohibit or strongly discourage the resale or transfer of LNG between LNG buyers. These destination clauses triggered several concerns. First, as you see in this slide, LNG seller can maintain the price level, including Japan premium, by prohibiting the resale or change in destination between LNG buyers. In short, price arbitration does not work under destination clauses. Secondly, destination clause may well hinder the growing LNG spot market by blocking the stream of LNG into the spot market. The spot market could be an important source of LNG supply in terms of diversification. And last but not least, destination clause may well also hinder the effective cooperation between LNG buyers, such as joint procurement, joint negotiation, and swap arrangements, which are all essential in increasing the efficiency of LNG procurement. Here, I would stress that the coordinated action within East Asian authorities are essential. This is because in order to facilitate the international price arbitration and ignite the spot market in the economical scale, purchases in China, Taiwan, and Korea should be also released from the binding effect of destination clauses. In recent G7 statement from Rome and Japan's strategic energy plan in 2014 both stressed the importance of relaxation or abolishment of destination clauses in order to promote more flexible and competitive gas market. Meanwhile, the European Commission has been successfully abolishing or prohibiting the future use of destination clauses through the enforcement of EU competition law since early 2000. And as a final step, the European Commission launched investigation into Gazprom, partly for its use of destination clauses against gas purchasers in Eastern Europe. Let's see Japan. Japan started to take an active role, international role, in ensuring competition and free trade in the natural resource sector. These are the two cases I participated in, and in 2008 and in 2010, the Japan Fair Trade Commission intervened twice to block the deal between the BHP Billiton and Rio Tinto. Both are the major mineral resources company in the world. In addition, in 2012, Japan brought a WTO challenge against China's export restrictions on rare earths, molybdenum, and tungsten, a key strategic natural mineral resources, before the WTO. And the WTO tribunal recently found that the China's export restrictions are not consistent with the basic rules of WTO. As these two cases symbolize, Japan is shifting its position from rule taker to rule maker in the sector of natural resources. And I would emphasize that legal action as well as policy arrangement could be an effective tool to relax or abolish destination clauses prevalently used in LNG into Japan.
Thank you very much. You are within time frame, 80 minutes. Thank you very much, cooperation. Okay, I like to construct a debate like this. Maybe allow us to have a roughly 10-minute interaction among the panelists. Then I'd like to share all the views with the floor people. And there is a 1-minute rule. When you ask a question, please confine it to 1 minute. And so prepare your 1-minute speech question from now. And also I'll be taking questions in a batch. Maybe 3 questions, then ask panelists, then back and forth. Before that, I have a few questions to Barbara. Answer should be within 2 minutes, my friend. Why a country in Europe like French people, they are not really diligent as Japanese, but why they are successful in maintaining that high standard and rate of nuclear? What's behind?
Of of their energy comes from 59 nuclear power plants. Now, why do the French have so, and they have a good constant source of reasonably priced energy. What happened in France, just quickly, is that after the great oil shock in the 70s, do you remember when OPEC stopped sending out oil? The French realized that they were totally dependent on foreign resources, foreign oil and gas. And the French president didn't like that at all. He was very cross about it, Giscard d'Estaing. So he did what every good businessman would do. He had an away day. He had a strategic away day. But he did it like the French would do it. He did it in a beautiful chateau with beautiful food and beautiful wine, and he took his cabinet away for a day. And he brought the cabinet and 2 other people. He brought a labor leader, and he brought a psychiatrist. Now, why did he bring a labor leader and a psychiatrist? Well, what they did was they spent the day figuring out how to deal with the energy problems in France. And they figured out that what they needed was nuclear. But how are they going to get the labor unions to go along with it? Well, what they did was they made a deal with the labor leader, which was that any labor leader who worked on a project that was a nuclear project would get a slightly higher hourly rate than any other kind of infrastructure project in the world. And remember, nuclear power plants are infrastructure projects. And then they also brought along the psychiatrist, and he gave his idea as well. And they came back to Paris the next day, and they had a press conference. And Giscard stood up in front of the population, and he said, "We are the French. Nous sommes les Français." We are the French. And we cannot be dependent upon any other nation, in his mind, a lesser nation, meaning the Middle East. We cannot be dependent on any other nation for our energy. And so, that was where the psychiatrist came in. So, we are not going to be dependent on any other nation. We are going to build power plants. And you little town in Western France, you want a new city hall? Well, if you take a nuclear power plant, we'll give you a new city hall, 2 infrastructure projects together. And you little town in Western France, you want a new hospital. Well, we'll give you a new hospital together with a new power plant. And you little town in Northern France, you want a ring road right around to Paris. That's a big infrastructure project. It goes with a power plant. And what happened is he had all those little towns in France bidding to have nuclear power plants in their district. So they'd get all that money, all that economics, and all that energy. And I have a little house in the south of France, and we have a power plant down the road. And we love it because we have cheap, reliable energy. So that's what happened in France. All the towns wanted nuclear energy. And today, they have a cheap source of energy, and they're the lowest carbon country in Europe.
Thank you for sharing the wonderful historical episode. I'd like to turn to Fujii-san. You talked about a wonderful word. Japan should not remain as a rule taker, rather become a rule maker. Could you just expand a little bit, but in 2 minutes?
Yes. When I brought the WTO challenge against China, and we argued before the WTO tribunal, and we stressed the point that no country is self-sufficient, and everyone needs to depend on other nations or countries by international trade. And so in my belief that Japan is now a kind of can be a leading position as a representative of the country with scarce natural resources. But this is true for any countries, but Japan is uniquely positioned to stress that point in the world economy. And we are one case by one case, we are accumulating the accomplishment. And I think United States and EU tends to regard Japan as a kind of a junior partner, but after the WTO litigation with them, they are starting to see Japan as a kind of a good partner to promote the world economy.
This is, I think, it's a very important signals for the future of Japan. Barbara, in one of the big engines in Europe called Germany, what's happening after they decide to phase out nuclear by 2020? 2022.
What I didn't say, because I was limited in time, is that in my view, remember I said a lot of issues related to nuclear begin with a P? Well, a big issue with respect to nuclear is political. Nuclear is often really a political issue. In the UK, and somebody will ask me about that, I'll tell you how it was a political issue in the UK, but in Germany, what happened in Germany was that Mrs. Merkel lost one small local election in an area right after the Fukushima accident. She lost this election, and thought she would win it. And she knew that the Green Party, who had won that election, were going to have to be part of the coalition that was going to put her in her next election. So they turned off the nuclear power plant. She knew, I know from the German officials that I've talked to, that she knew the country needed nuclear, but she's, after all, wanted to be reelected. And so they turned off the power plants, actually quite quickly. And what's happening now is Germany, which is one of the greenest nations, as you just said, in Europe, is having a terrible problem. First of all, they're buying gas from Russia. Now, frankly, buying gas from Russia is not exactly where you want to be in the middle of the Ukraine crisis. Second of all, they're buying nuclear energy from France because and those little power plants that I told you about before, they're all on the French-German border, but they're buying French nuclear. Third of all, they're burning coal, the worst, dirtiest coal you could possibly imagine, which they get from Germany and from America, who don't like coal, so they're sending it to Germany. So their emissions are going sky high, and the price of energy is going sky high. So the German population is actually quite unhappy about having turned off the power plants, because what they thought they were going to get was a lot of renewable energy. They have some renewable energy, but it's quite expensive, and it's keeping the price of energy quite high. So the political decision in Germany, while it seemed like a good idea at the time, is turning out to be a bad economic decision.
I think one of the differences, Germany is connected to its transmission line of natural gas, oil, and power. So they have they can indulge with import and export of energy, but probably slightly different for this country, isolated. Fujii-san, you talked about relaxation of trading terms of LNG. It's easy to say, but maybe very hard to do because no one succeeded so far in eastern part of the world. So what would be the enablers of those changes, if you may say?
Thank you for asking that important questions. Based on my experience handling the rare earths case and the BHP Billiton Rio Tinto case, there's two important things to do. The first is the political will to push this movement. This is we see in the rare earths case. First, Japan was really cautious about doing the dispute against China because of the bilateral relations, and we have many Japanese investors in China, and we are a little bit afraid of a retaliation. However, finally, Japanese government decided to go forward and made accomplishment. And we don't see any specific retaliation because of this WTO challenge in China. So this time, if we brought this dispute about LNG destination clause, there might be some tension from the oil and gas producing countries and the strong multinational companies like the majors. But political will need to take an initiative to go forward. The other important thing is, in my opinion, is a commitment from the user industries. In BHP Rio case, because BHPB is located in Australia and not in the territory of Japan, so Japan Fair Trade Commission could not have enough cooperation from BHPB. But Japanese Fair Trade Commission collect information using lawyer by the Japanese steel industries, how much they are buying from BHPB and what is the trading term. And as such, Japan Trade Fair Commission can collect information from the user industries. At that time, steel industries in Japan was really committed to cooperate with JFTC. So as for the LNG case, we need a political will to push forward and the commitment from the user industries to fully cooperate with JFTC, as well as competition authorities in Taiwan, Korea, and China.
Do you think the Japanese political community, economic community is ready to go for that?
That's a tough question, and so this kind of conference is really useful to promote the idea of this kind of thing and to gather understanding from the political community as well.
Thank you. Great. You are very punchy. Barbara, I have a tough question to you. I watched energy situation in Japan ever since before and after Fukushima, and I'm irritated on one thing. There is no powerful politicians who can speak up. This is the energy mix needed for Japan, whatever the current environment is. There's not many courses for this big size of country to take in terms of energy mix, but no politicians dare to say something really concrete about. But you are uniquely foreigner, woman, and the most beautiful woman here. But apart from that, as a foreigner, could you suggest This gonna be the future energy mix of Japan. You have no straight jacket from as Japanese, so please have some words on that.
Well, you're right. That's a very hard question because nobody can say what the energy mix for another country is going to be. But I'll try to talk about some principles for a minute. As I understand it, Japan doesn't have many natural resources. It imports LNG at the highest price in the world, and it doesn't have any particular oil and gas, and it doesn't have much coal anyway, but I don't think that's the future. Coal is not the future for most countries. So, as I also understand it, the Prime Minister Abe has said that nuclear needs to be part of the future energy mix. As you have heard, I believe in it. In the UK, I was one of the people who thought that we had to look at nuclear when we looked at the future energy mix of the UK. In the UK, we believe that we hope we can have 20% of our energy delivered by nuclear power. We are trying to do that as we speak by building new nuclear power plants. My opinion is that any country that has the resources of brains and engineers and money, should try to have at least 20% of its energy delivered by nuclear. I know that it was about 30%, or it was going to 30% before the accident, and then it was going to 30 or 40. But so that I would say that, if I were making it up, I'd say it should be 25% nuclear, but I don't really know the answer to that. I know that LNG at that high price is much too high, and then there needs to be some kind of buying agreement that was discussed in order to bring oil and gas into this country. I do believe that renewables are part of the future, but they're expensive right now. There's no storage, and there's no way to transport them, and they're expensive, and we have to keep investing in them, but at the moment they're not baseload. So I think nuclear is the future, but not the close future. I told you, renewables are doing a lot of bad things to the economics of Germany and Spain. Remember what's happening in Spain. So I couldn't tell you this amount of percent, but I think nuclear needs to be a big part of the future, and I think money should be spent developing renewables, but you can't count on them at the moment. And I agree that we need to find a way to buy LNG cheaper so that we can use that as a fuel as well.
Thank you, Barbara, for this courageous and important input to the debate. I'd like to open the floor, allow more than 27 minutes for interactions, rather than 20 minutes asked by the organizer. But when you ask question, please identify your name and affiliation, and who you are asking the question, and maybe one question, and in 1 minute. 1 minute's rule, please. Please. Yes, Joshua.
Sure, I'm Joshua Walker from APCO Worldwide, and I'm coming from DC, and so I wanted to ask you a two-part question to Lady Judge. You talked about France, you talked about Germany. I'm curious about the British case. A lot of people compare the island of Japan to Asia as Britain is to Europe. So kind of talking about what that means, and also given that the U.S.-Japan alliance is one of the major drivers. It's one question, but I want to direct it also to you, since I know you're an expert on the U.S.-Japan alliance. The role that energy policy plays in this, I think as our moderator has pointed out, this is one major deficiency that's very frustrating for many people. We understand domestic politics, but I think sometimes Japan's energy needs are not very well articulated by your international friends. And so I'm curious about what the role of the U.S.-Japan alliance plays in that energy mix discussion after we hear about what the UK role is.
Okay, that's question one. And yes, please.
Thierry Porté. I am with JC Flowers, a private equity firm, and I'm a longtime resident of Japan, and also married to a Japanese, which is relevant to my question for Lady Judge, and I do appreciate all the work you're doing to bring about change. Nuclear power was presented to the Japanese many years ago as being a solution that would be perfect. Nothing would go wrong, it would all be perfect. A very senior executive of TEPCO once told me, of course we knew that wasn't true, but we had to present it that way in order to get people to accept it. And in any case, even if it's not perfect, it's not a problem. But there was no need to trouble people with such details. I'm simplifying, but that's the issue. Here's the question. The result of that is people like my wife, the smartest person in my household, totally, absolutely, adamantly opposed. And why? Because she feels she has been lied to. Never told the truth, not by TEPCO, not by the government, not by nuclear authorities, not told the truth. So the question is, can this be overcome? And if so, how? And is that part of the very, I'm sure, excellent work that is being done at TEPCO on safety? Is this particular issue being addressed as part of the program?
Okay, I'll stop here and ask panelists to respond to that. Fujii-san first, then Barbara.
The question about US-Japan relationship and the role in the international energy issue, especially for how they impact Japan. And I should talk about a little bit about shale gas, right? The shale gas totally changing the power balance, and also it could be a very beneficial to Japan, because now we are seeing the export of shale gas from US to Japan does not have destination clause inside. And there may be some reason, but first, US is a really country with toughing enforcement of antitrust law. That might be one reason. But we see the good relationship between the US-Japan makes the US government decided to give permission to export shale gas to Japan. And with this shale gas, I think we can have more bargaining power. Japan can have more bargaining power against the Middle East countries and Russia and Indonesia, Malaysia, who are exporting LNG to Japan. So shale gas from US can play a critical role to change the bargaining power balance between Japan and those traditional LNG export countries.
But is there any guarantee shale gas from US would be cheaper than others?
Currently, we see that the price trend of shale gas, that's also turned into LNG and come to Japan, but it's much cheaper and without destination clause.
Barbara, are you ready?
Yes,
Please.
I'm going to answer this question first, because it's not just Japan that's done that. Nothing is 100% safe. Nothing in the entire world. There are more accidents that occur in your bathroom than it's historically true than in any other place in the world, in your own bathroom. There are more accidents that occur in coal mines, in trains, on airplanes, walking across the street than have occurred in nuclear power plants since the beginning of the building of nuclear power plants. The problem is communication. Remember, I was talking about the P's and PR, and the nuclear industry itself, not just TEPCO, but in the UK, I faced this when I was chairman of the Atomic Energy. The nuclear industry has been its own worst enemy. It has gone around years ago and said, this is perfectly safe, it's the answer, we can have energy too cheap to meter. Well, we know nothing is perfectly safe, and people who believe it then are terribly disappointed when, in fact, it's not perfectly safe. If you went on an airplane and saw an airplane crash and you were told that there will never be an airplane crash, you're going to be extremely unhappy when you find there is an airplane crash. But fortunately, you know that there are going to be airplane crashes, and you still take airplanes, right? We all still take. I got here on an airplane, although I know perfectly well that there are plane crashes all the time. I work and I have to go across the street every time I go to work, and I know that there are people that get hit by cars. But the nuclear industry said it's 100% safe. It was a huge mistake. It was a huge mistake, and then they were very opaque about it. This is in the world. This is not just Japan. We had it in the UK. We said to the UK citizens, don't worry about anything, just trust me. Trust us, we're the industry. Well, my father told me once, many years ago, never trust a man that says, trust me. Frankly, that's about the truth. The nuclear industry itself has to reform itself, not just TEPCO on my issue, which is safety, but the whole industry. It has to say nothing. Believe me, all those kinds of energy, coal that I was talking about, oil, look what happened to BP, oil, gas, renewables, there are going to be accidents. If any kind of energy were perfectly safe, any kind of it, we'd only be using it. The fact is there's always going to be accidents. The problem is that for many years the whole industry didn't say there may be problems like in everywhere else. And there's going to be a big rebuilding of trust effort. And the industry itself, the World Nuclear Association, the people in Vienna, everybody are going to have to get more open, more transparent, bring people into the power plant, show them around, show them what goes right and what can go wrong. And then people are going to make their own judgments. But you're exactly right. That was a mistake of the whole industry 25, 30 years ago, and now they're paying the price for it. We had the problem in England, which goes to the second question that was asked. England. So what happened in England? Well, as I told you, about 10 years ago, we realized that we were importing gas from the North Sea as opposed to exporting it. A number of us went to the then Prime Minister, who was at that point, by the time I got involved in it, Tony Blair, and we said, you should go back to building nuclear power plants, because if all you do is decommission the existing power plants, you'll go from 20% down to delivered by nuclear to 2% delivered by nuclear by 2020, which is the focus of this conference. So we started to think about building power plants. But nuclear is a political issue. So the first thing we had to do was talk to the Labour Party, because they were in power. But then we had to go talk to the Conservative Party, because nobody will build a power plant in one administration when they know there's going to be a change in party in the next administration. So then we talked to the Conservatives, who weren't in power, but they agreed that we needed a source of baseload generation. What we forgot was the Lib Dems, because we never thought they were going to be in power. So what happened was Blair was there, and we said we're going to do nuclear energy. Then Brown came in, same party. Took him a while, actually, to embrace nuclear energy. Not because he didn't believe in it, because it was Blair's issue, and he didn't want to get onto Blair's issue. Then there was the election, and instead of having the Conservatives, we had the Lib Dems and the Conservatives. And so they came into power with the Conservatives, and Lib Dems have been historically against nuclear. But when they got in and they looked at the facts about what the energy needs were of the UK, what it was going to cost to build nuclear energy, they were very much more into climate change in these days than we were 10 years ago. Even the Lib Dems came along to believe that nuclear was right for Britain. And the most recent vote that we had on building power plants in the Parliament, there were only 6 votes against the whole issue, because it's not a political issue anymore. We've taken it off the table. Right now, we're about to be building 3 new sets of power plants, and the country is in favor of it. It wasn't always in favor. We had to start to open the PR and the discussions, but at the moment, we have taken it off the political agenda and put it on the economic agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. The great communicator, Nick, is waiting. Nick.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me pick up on the issue of culture and behavior and reform, not just in Japan, but elsewhere. And you've got the experience in the British nuclear industry, and I'll declare my mother wrote the history of the nuclear.
Brilliant, your
yeah,
mother.
and therefore I was brought up with the problem of understanding how the nuclear industry was very resistant, and we went through the 1957 Windscale fire as well. But I say that because you're now faced with a significant challenge, both in TEPCO and also the way you change culture elsewhere in the nuclear industry. And let's not name other countries, but there are a lot of other countries which could have a Fukushima because of the internal attitude towards, dare I say, the arrogance of how the nuclear industry has gone. And I'm intrigued as to what you've discovered in the last year or two about how the behavior and the culture of those inside the industry can be changed. This is a psychological problem. It's a behavioral problem. It's a traditional problem of how they've been brought up as engineers and managers. And whether it be in the nuclear industry or any other industry, this is a major business and governance and behavioral challenge. And I'm just wondering what you've discovered so far and how this can be done.
Okay, may I take another question? Yes.
Sorry. It's got to be a token. I'm here actually helping out the Plastic Oceans Foundation. I'll declare my hand. In the early 80s, I did a degree in nuclear energy, nuclear physics. And it's interesting because then I experienced exactly the same things going on as are still going on, the same arguments, the same discussions between, whether or not coal fire or gas fire or nuclear. And really it's a sort of a general question because, I had a house, I lived off Norfolk, and where I used to live, they've now just built the largest wind farm, or they're building the largest wind farm. And currently the biggest problem is the fact that the noise of the windmills is upsetting the fish. So my question really is sort of just a big open one is, isn't it about time, given it's been going on for so long, just to actually accept we can't please everybody and, you know, just try to do the best we can?
Barbara?
I love that question, because that's really the point of my bouquet of energy sources. I mean, in actual fact, there is no form of energy that is going to please everyone. It's exactly right. The renewables are hurting the fish, they're hurting the birds. Frankly, when I drive around England and I see those windmills, I don't think they're beautiful. I think they're horrible, actually. I think they're absolutely horrible, beautiful, long place. Even in France, where they have more land and those windmills don't offend, they're very offensive to what beauty is about, for me. So I agree. We have to open up the conversation. We have to accept that there is no form of energy that A, is accident-free, and B, is effective all the time, and C, manages to keep the climate as clean as we want it to. And we hope we're doing that now. I mean, I spend a lot of time talking about energy, and I try to say there's no panacea. That's why I think we need a bit of everything, because if we have a bit of everything, then we have a bit of the good of everything, and frankly, a bit of the bad of everything. But at least we have at least we have a panoply. At least we have an opportunity not to be dependent on one kind of energy source. It's dependency that's a problem for any country, because I wouldn't have wanted to be in the Ukraine when the Russians turned off the gas, which is actually what started the nuclear renaissance in the early 2000s. As far as Nick's question, you're exactly right. The nuclear industry in the world has been a closed door. People have, as I said, taken this trust me attitude, which I've never believed in. I think the good thing that happens with accidents, wind scale fire is a good example. We had a big accident in the UK, and our regulatory system got better, and our disclosure system got better, and things happened. Remember the great crash of '29 in the US? We started the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. I was a commissioner in my youth. We never would have had such open markets, which the Japanese were looking forward to utilizing in the 80s, if we hadn't had terrible practices in the markets in the 20s and 30s. Sometimes terrible things can have good consequences, just like we set up the SEC. I think this accident will bring about a raising of standards, not just in Japan, but in the whole rest of the world. That the whole rest of the world will learn the lessons of Fukushima, and that maybe in 50 years we won't be talking about the same story.
Could I just pick up there? I mean, the issue of behavioral and how you get people who've worked in a certain way to change and understand the positive side of it. It's actually the training and counseling process. And I'm just wondering what you're already discovering.
Well, the thing is, first of all, you have to make it important. You have to make safety the highest priority. Second of all, what I set up in the Nuclear Safety Regulatory Office that I'm doing, the idea is that instead of, in the old days, people that went to the safety division in the UK, where I come from, those were not the really smartest guys. The really smartest guys who were going up through the organization didn't end up in the safety department. What you have to do is you have to make safety important. You have to say that every time you have an intake of young people into a company, the really smartest ones have to spend some time in safety. They have to be part of the NSOO, Nuclear Safety Regulatory Office. In order to be chief executive of TEPCO someday, you have to have had some time in safety. In order to be chief executive of EDF, you should have some time in safety. You have to make safety the place where the best and the brightest want to be. You have to make it be a badge of being smart and being a winner, not a badge of just being a compliance person. It's not compliance, it's achievement.
I think this is a very important lessons from Fukushima and others. Yes, Fujii-san?
Yeah, may I add one word about the renewable energies? In the course of my work handling international trade law and the investment law in the government, I see the two problems about the renewable energies are facing globally. These two are the nationalism and the feasibility. And it stems from the simple fact that renewable energies heavily rely on the government subsidies, most notably in the form of the feed-in tariff. So governments are liable to prioritize their domestic goods and service when they supply the subsidies in the form of FIT. And as a result, the countries like Canada, India, and the European Union are all facing WTO challenges for their FIT program. And move on to the feasibility. Now some governments are realized that how heavily burdening to their national finance keep providing the subsidies, and they started to reduce and cut back the amount of subsidies. And as a result, the investors in the renewable energy sectors said they are damaged by the change in decision of the government and started to sue government in the international investment arbitration, which we can see a lot of arbitration pending in Spain. So I think the renewables is not also insulated from some political difficulties and the technical and also economical analysis. So it's not only nuclear, but renewables have their own problems.
Okay, I'd like to take 2 more questions. Yes, Robert?
You started out by saying that you do words, not numbers. Let me put some numbers in. Right now, Japanese, on average, use about 7,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year. It's about the same in Western Europe. The United States is double that. Okay? If Brazil, China, and India, citizens of those countries, were to use the same amount as in Japan, total global electricity generation would have to double. Okay? Let's say nukes keep the same share they have right now. We'd have to build another 400, maybe 500 of them. And this is where the economics comes in. What I see missing in our discussion today is a notion of, call it marginal cost of producing new resources, and lack of emphasis on the dynamics of technology development. Okay? Okay, say we have to double the number of reactors that we've got right now. Just same share we've got generating right now. Okay? Where do we get the uranium? How much is it going to cost? What do we do with the waste? And how much does that cost? These are hard questions. Okay? So that's the new question. On technology, I would be delighted to see oil prices go to $200 a barrel. And the reason I'd be delighted to see that, despite a terrible global recession, is that that is the sort of pressure that makes technology develop much faster than it does otherwise. Okay? We initially got nuclear technology out of World War II. Okay? Used it in a very unfortunate way, of course, but that's where it came from. So when mankind is faced with these major, major challenges in everybody's face, that's when you get new technology. If you look at the speed of development of the efficiency of solar cells over the last 30 years, it's quite remarkable. If this goes on for the next 15, 20 years, solar is going to be cheaper than gas without subsidies. Okay? So in our discussion, and this comes back to the best mix issue, best mix is not independent of price. Okay? And so if I could get some comments on where you think sort of the market for uranium is going to go, if we keep with nukes even at their current level, and where do you see the most promising technologies 10 years from now? Is it methane hydrate? Japan's great at methane hydrate. Is it solar this? We just saw a headline in the paper this morning. Panasonic, I think it was, has now perfected a method for, it doubles the efficiency of artificial photosynthesis. That's kind of cool. Okay? So how much resources should we put into technology development to address some of these issues?
Time of interest, we have to stop taking questions, and if you like, Barbara, would you like to respond?
Yeah,
Then I will follow.
I totally agree with you. Bad things get good things. So if oil went to $200 a barrel, there would be a huge rush to find the technological way to solve that problem. I was trying to say that about accidents too. There's no doubt that the reaction to something bad happening is often something good. So I totally agree with that. Your first question was about building building power plants and how we have a big problem. We can't build enough nuclear power plants to deal with the issue if people start using as much energy as they may in it. We haven't talked about the best kind of energy. which is energy efficiency and energy conservation. Thank you for raising it. Of course, what we really need to do in the world is start to be more efficiently use our energy. We have to conserve energy. We have to have the low-hanging fruit. I spend a lot of time saying it's not relevant in Japan, particularly at the moment, but all we have to do is not have air conditioners go so cold in summer that you get a cold, and not have heaters go so high in winter that you're sweltering. If we just looked at insulating our houses, if we looked at energy efficient measures, we could take down the amount of energy that the world is using so we don't have to build double the amount of nuclear power plants. I totally agree with you. And frankly, you said, what kind of technology do I see for the future? I actually see a lot of it in energy efficiency. I see where we should be putting our money is using less energy altogether. And I happen to be chairman of the Energy Institute of UCL. And we get a lot of money into that Energy Institute to do demand-side research, to do research on what we can do within government regulations to make the new buildings energy efficient. That's where I would like to see the money poured, if we can. And I often think that I wasn't an energy efficient person before I got into nuclear. I didn't think about it. But today, every time I walk out of a hotel room, I turn off the lights. And I judge everybody on energy efficiency about whether they turn off the lights in a hotel room, because it's not your money. It's not your money. You watch it.
That's great. You have changed great. Okay, we have just 4 minutes and 30 seconds left, and I'd like to ask two panelists to share just 1 or 2 key messages in 2 minutes. Fujii-san, could you start?
What I think I would take away from this session is that now I realize international cooperation developing into the next phase. That in the past, our team advised the Japanese nuclear tech company when they have alliance with French company and get government approval. In that case, we really emphasize the importance of the technological development and the exploration of the international market achieved through such alliance. But now today I listened to a key speech from Lady Judge, and now I realize that the international cooperation now deepening into the phase of more humane aspect of cooperation. The imbibing wisdom from all over the world can reform a culture and governance and how people behave and think. And that is, I think, the really important aspect now we are having. And another message will be that Japan should be an international rule maker. This is true for the energy security, which I discuss and present, and I realize it's true for the nuclear safety issue. Now Japan can, if after the achievement of achieving the highest nuclear safety standard, now then we can export such standard to the international society. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Barbara, in 2 minutes.
Okay, I did say my main message is that every country needs a bouquet of energy sources. We need everything: oil, gas, renewables, coal, and nuclear. And that the other source of energy, which is the energy that you don't use, which is energy efficiency. My other message to Japanese is that we should, and to the world, is that we should be educating women about energy. A, they're the users of energy, and B, they're the people that make a lot of decisions. And as I said, women are often the ones that are against nuclear energy, and that's because people aren't educating them. It's your point. The whole world needs to be educated on the benefits and the detriments of all kinds of energy, but we need to be talking about the issue. But I'd like to tell a joke at the end. Do you remember my story about France and how the French have 80% of their energy delivered by 59 nuclear power plants, and how Giscard d'Estaing took everybody away in this beautiful chateau? Well, I saw him not so many years ago, about 2 years ago. He may be old, but he's still with it. And so I said, is this really true that you took everybody away in this chateau and you gave them food and wine, and you had a psychiatrist and a labor leader there, and you came back? I told him the whole story. And he looked at me and he said, yes, Barbara, that's the story, but you missed the most important point. I said, I did. What's the most important point? He said, that labor leader, he was a socialist, and he was drinking my champagne in my chateau. So actually, on energy, we got both parties together. That's what I'd like to say.
Thank you very much. I think I have to close in 1 minute, but first of all, I really thank the wonderful audience. Without you, we cannot have this wonderful debate. And also, thanks to great panelists. And hopefully, Barbara will not be kidnapped by Hollywood, but she had a good chance of being that. And Fujii-san, you really proved you'll be the next generation leader of this country globally. And before closing, my humble wish is, yes, we have a lot of debate on energy in Japan, but this debate should not be confined to how to make Japan recover faster, better, but it should go beyond Japanese arena and how we can influence the rest of the world in their fight against the big challenge of climate change. But Japan really should make a role model itself and to share that with the rest of the world. And this, I really have to thank Hori-san and GLOBIS. This kind of wonderful exchange really stimulate our thinking. And hopefully the media people will deliver this wonderful message to the broad community. With this, thank you very much, everybody. And please give everybody big hands.
Thank you very much, Professor Masuda. Once again, please join me in giving a big hand to all the panelists.